I'd like to open this session of the Finance Committee for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District. Welcome one and all. We now have the public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within committee scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any speaker forms?
There are no speakers this evening.
Okay, thank you. Chair will entertain a motion for consent items.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent items.
Thank you, and I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Motion passes.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, we have two presentation items this evening. Both are with Mr. K. Campo, and we have, the first one is financial report through October 14. Sir, it's yours.
So again, as you mentioned, we have two reports tonight. The first is the, more or less the standard Finance Committee report, where we'll look at the revenues and expenses of the district. And then I'd like to take the opportunity to brief the Finance Committee on where we're at currently with the update to the fire capital facilities fee and our plan review fees. So we'll start with the Finance Committee report. We'll go through this fairly quickly, because everything seems to be on track and about where we should be this time of year. So the first slide looks at our cash balance as of August 31st. Clearly, we're in the midst of our dry period financing. Our cash balances at the end of October are about $2.6 million. So again, it's right about where we were at this time last year. Of course, we'll have one more month through November with declining balances in both cash and reserves, but you know, we're expecting our first payment of property taxes here within the next couple of weeks, or three to 4 weeks at most, we hope. So again, the reserve balances, the reserve balance follows pretty much the cash balance. So again, we're clearly in our dry period here. So technically, at this point in time, the district really has no reserve fund, right, until we get our next installment of property tax revenue. So we're essentially borrowing money at this point in time from the county pool, and we'll replenish that with the next property tax installment. But again, as we get through, well, the next report will be covered through the through December 31st. So hopefully we'll have some property tax revenue by then.
I've paid mine.
Very good. So you can see, I'll just point out down at the bottom of the box, it's, as of October 31/14, we show minus 11%. That's because we're in a negative position here. Medic cost recovery is our next slide. Thank you. We're tracking ahead here, so we're just over $12 million through October. So we're ahead of last year and we're ahead of budget. You know, this is really the first full year, I think, of our single role paramedic program. So that was fully underway in July. And so we're gaining experience, and we'll hopefully continue to track ahead here and be in the same position when we get to June 30. I'd like to mention also that in the budget for this fiscal year, we had about $700,000 of GEMT revenue, and that would be for the last fiscal year, the 13-14 year. We filed the cost reports at the end of November for the 13-14 GEMT, and our recovery amount was about $820,000. So it'll be about $120,000 more than what we had projected in terms of GEMT cost recovery.
Excuse me, Mr. Campo, quick question there. For 13-14, it was $700,000?
Yeah, we get the money this year, and we had projected $700,000, and it turns out the actual was $820,000 of additional reimbursement.
Okay, and did that, was that, that collection, is that good through the entire fiscal 13-14 year?
Yeah, that was for all the transports in fiscal year 13-14.
So 12 months?
Yes.
Okay, sir, thank you.
And we should get that revenue in about April, May? Yep. Okay. So we filed the cost reports on November 30. That was the date they were due. They need to get processed, but we expect the revenue in about April or May of next year.
Thank you.
Next slide is the total revenues for the district. Again, we really don't take off here until we get the property tax installment, but we're right on track where we thought we'd be in terms of the budget. The command staff and I met with our property tax consultant, HDL. I think that was last week, Chief, that we met. And they gave us the analysis for the 14-15 year, so the current budget year. And just bottom line, for the secured, unsecured, and the unitary taxes, which is the bulk of our property tax revenue, they're estimating based on the assessed value that was certified by the county assessor that the district should receive about $118 million for those revenue sources, for those property tax sources. That's about $3.4 million more than what we had budgeted for those items. So it's very, very positive news. Kind of positive and maybe not so positive. The bulk of that increase, about $2.2 million of that, comes from the Prop 8 recapture that we've talked about several times, where the assessor can go back, where he lowered values when property values were declining. He can go back and raise those beyond the 2% CPI growth. Mm-hmm. So that accounted about a 5% overall growth in property tax, and about 3.5% of that was the Prop 8 recapture, which is good because that's going to be ongoing. However, that meant the growth in all the other values was only about 1.5%. So that wasn't very significant. And out of that 1.5%, about 0.5% was the CPI adjustment that the counties, all counties in the state were allowed to do. Because you can adjust, the assessor can adjust property values by 2% or CPI, whichever is lower. Mm-hmm. So in this case, so if you take that out, then the overall growth in values was only about 1%. So that's still looks like a slow recovery for the district.
Is that their prediction for ongoing? That it's going to be real slow like that?
HDL was thinking it continued to be slow, although we just got it notice from them that the state has set the CPI factor for next fiscal year, and that's going to be 1.998%. So it's going to be very, very close to the 2% level. And then we just have to look at the change in property values, the change in property that's being sold. And hopefully there's another further bump there. So we'll see a little more growth. And there's still some potential to recapture more of that Prop 8 pool. So there's, if we can recapture that before the properties change hands and get locked in at a lower value, then we have some additional recapture there.
I think one thing we can note is that we could have sat back and not done anything and been satisfied with 1% or whatever the growth rate was. But because of the positive steps that we've made in a lot of different areas, we seem to be doing fairly well, even though the recovery is real slow.
It is. So that's about $3.4 million, actually, is what it comes out to be, about $3.4 million more than what we had projected for this fiscal year. However, that's assuming you collect the entire $118 million. About the same time we were getting this information, the Aerojet appeals were being settled, and those go back 5 or 6 years. And there was some fairly significant declines. So overall, I think around $30 million came off of the tax roll for the Aerojet property. I think that had something to do with some of their development plans being pulled back. So some of their properties that were maybe being valued for development potential were pretty much written off to nothing in terms of the assessed valuation. So there's two things that go on there. There's the multiple years of refunds that have to be paid back. So it's not just 1 year, it's each year that they had appealed. And so there's a lump sum refund for those years, and then there's the ongoing reduction because now that value is off the tax roll going forward. Fortunately, the way the property tax system works, the first year of a refund, all the entities in the county share in that decline in value or increase in value if it's going the other way. And then the following January 1st is when the assessor actually adjusts the value for this district. So this district's value will go down going forward. But in the year of the initial refund, everybody shares. So we only take a small hit that first year's. But it still is going to be a $300,000 hit to the district this fiscal year. So that's going to offset that $3.4 million of additional revenue coming in.
Sorry, was that 3.4 million additional revenue or 3.4% increase in revenue?
Did I say percent? It's 3.4 million additional revenue.
Oh, okay.
Or
Yeah.
5%.
Yeah, there was about a 5% increase.
So it was cash,
overall.
all right, sorry, I was just trying to get it straight, thanks.
Now, we're going to lose 300,000 of that because of the Aerojet settlement. And then ongoing, we're going to lose about $200,000 a year on an ongoing basis. So the $30 million reduction ongoing will result in about $200,000 a year. Now, so that gets us down to a net maybe $3.1 million over what we had budgeted. Take the 3.4, take away the 300. Now that's, again, if there's still other appeals that will be settled, that will make that number come down. I'm expecting that there would be positive supplemental taxes for property that's changing hands, that's selling for more than what the assessor has on the books. So we have that to look forward to, I think. And then we haven't received our prior year teeter payment or cleanup payment from last fiscal year. We haven't received that yet, so that should be coming in December or January sometime. So we have an estimate for that, but we'll have to see how that turns out, because what the county makes us whole through the teeter plan, but they also offset prior year refunds and other things against that number. So we really don't know what that number is going to be until we get it.
They make you whole once you pay the fees.
Yeah, yeah. So, so it looks like we're headed in the positive, in the right direction with this increased property tax revenue, but we'll know a lot more once we get the first payment, and then we see what the teeter payment looks like. I just wanted to share where we were with respect to property tax. It's such a large component of our ongoing revenues.
And that's due around the first of the year or before?
Well, typically, most agencies get their first payment right around December 15th. This county's been very, very slow in
Christmas.
moving the money over to the district. So
Actually, it's been significantly slower over the last
It
several
has.
years. That's why I didn't mean to chuckle inappropriately, but
Yeah.
it's been very late.
it could be January or February before we get our first payment. That is extremely late
Yes.
in my experience. Okay, so the next slide is salaries and benefits. Again, we're right on track, right where we should be at this point through October. Of course, this will change as we get these FLSA payments rolling out. That's going to add, $4.8 million that we hadn't budgeted. We'll have to do a cleanup at mid-year for that. But right now, it looks like we're right on track, right where we should be in terms of salaries and benefits. And again, overall spending follows pretty closely to salaries and benefits. That's where the bulk of the operating expenditures lie. So we're, again, right on track for that. And I think the last slide we have has to do with our CERP fund, our Retiree Medical Trust Fund. Right now, we're just under $10 million. So we have about $9 million in contributions so far into the fund, and about $700,000 in earnings. So about $9.8 million in the fund. So only $140 million to go.
Just a zero.
We just hope the stock market stays strong.
And you played the lottery too?
No. Now I'd like to switch over to the, if there's any questions by the committee, let's switch over to the Capital Facilities Fee Program.
Thank you.
See if I can find that one. This, okay, this is a program seemingly I've been working on since my arrival at the district. It's been quite a project. And just to give you some background, and maybe for those that haven't been following along with this program, but this is where we're looking at the impacts of new development and how the district's going to finance the improvements, the stations, the engines, the trucks, and all the other apparatus and equipment needed to serve those new development areas. Clearly, we can't get it from property tax revenue, and we can't wait until we accumulate that money from property tax revenue, if we ever do that, to pay for these types of facilities. So typically, most large agencies, cities in particular, have a whole series of what they call development impact fees. Those are governed by state law and how those can be collected from development. You have to follow certain criteria, certain principles about fairness and equity, and not charging new development for past sins where you may have existing deficiencies. You can't charge new development to make up for existing deficiencies. So, and developers get very excited about having to pay these fees. You know, a typical city would have a traffic fee, a water fee, a sewer fee, a police fee, a fire fee, a parks fee, a school fee. They could easily end up costing $60,000 to $80,000, you know, to pull a permit for a single-family home. So there's agencies in the area. There's the North State Building Industry Association that usually pays very close attention to these fees. When I worked for cities, we would have to prepare annual reports on our development impact fees, submit those to the Building Industry Association, so they're checking to make sure that you're spending the money correctly. And essentially, you need to spend the money on those items to mitigate the impact of development. And they're restricted for that purpose. And so they're typically accounted for, collected, and put into a separate fund, and then only used for those items for which you said that you were collecting the money. So for fire stations to serve new areas, or apparatus to serve these new developing areas. So that's just a bit of a backdrop. So you have to get a handle on the amount of new development that's going to take place. Then you have to identify what it's going to take to serve those areas. And you're going to have to cost those facilities. And then you have to take that cost and spread that over the new development in a fair and equitable manner. So those are kind of the big picture steps. So the district engaged Citygate Associates to help develop the number of stations that are going to be needed based on the deployment standards adopted by the board. So Citygate is very familiar with those standards. So they took those standards and then applied them to these development areas. So Larry Davis and I went around to Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights, county planning departments, collected all the information we could on new development areas. And so we came up with a list. And so that was kind of our starting point. And I'm just giving the Finance Committee an update here, just a briefing on where we are. And this will all come back before the full board, hopefully at your next board meeting in January. So Citygate compiled this information where they were looking at and working with the county and the cities. And so basically looking at these development areas, looking at the acreage to be developed, looking at the number of potential dwelling units that each of these plans had talked about. Roughly, we came up with 113,000 additional homes. This is through build out, and a population approaching 300,000. So it's like servicing a fairly good-sized city. That's all the projects on the planning horizon for the next however long, 30, 40 years. So Citygate went through their analysis. They used a firm out of Southern California to prepare a model to identify where to place various stations to meet the various response times. And so they would plot stations on a map and they would run them over and over and over again. So I think they probably went through 400 or 500 different runs to identify where the ideal location for stations were so they can meet those 4-minute travel times or 8 minutes for trucks or whatever it is for truck travel times. And they plotted those on a map. But they came up with a number of stations, engine companies, truck companies, battalion companies, that sort of thing. So we come up with a total, I should mention too that we also included in this analysis the Natomas Fire Protection District area, although it's outside of the district area right now. We know we were looking at that area. We wanted to know what it would take to serve that area. However, in terms of what will come back to the board ultimately to be adopted in terms of a fee ordinance does not include that area since it's not within our service area. But at least we had it included here so we can get the whole picture. So we came up with 21 to 23 engine companies, 11 to 12 if you excluded the northwest planning area, which is the Natomas Fire Protection area. 5 ladder trucks, 5 additional ladder truck companies, 3 without that area, and 4 battalion chiefs, and 3 with excluding the northwest planning area. So this is kind of what it looks like. The red dots are the existing Metro's existing companies. The blue dots, and I know it's hard to see up on the screen here, but the blue dots are the proposed stations and the truck companies, and you'll see them clustered around Rancho Cordova area down there. That's where all the growth is really scheduled to take place. And then you'll see up in the northwest area, that's the Natomas Fire Protection District area. Now, this analysis needed to be fine-tuned a little bit because at the time they did this, Citygate wasn't aware of all the open space wildland area up there that's not going to be developed. So they assumed all that area was going to be developed. So there's probably 3 or 4 more stations up there than actually needs to be up in that area.
Excuse me, Ken, I have a quick question.
Yes,
On the
ma'am.
map, what's the difference between, map-wise, boundary-wise, between northwest and then just the north? The previous slide had
Northwest annexation
northern
area?
plan. Well, maybe I'm reading it wrong. See how second white line says northern plan areas?
Oh.
Ladder trucks, northern plan, and then it goes down to battalion chiefs, northern plan. On the map, is that the same
Well, there's-
boundary as northwest MPA?
No, I don't believe it is.
It's, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I believe there's 4 different planning areas out there. And one's called the Northwest section. I think that's what they're referring to. That's the one in the most imminent growth area.
Oh, okay, so is it safe to assume then that the northern plan areas are larger than the northwest? Northwest is included within the northern plan?
I'd have to ask, Chief Holbrook, do you have a?
Yeah, that I don't have that answer. We can figure that, I
Well,
mean,
we'll
we
figure,
can
I just
find
say
that out for you.
that to help kind of focus on what
North Plan.
What needs to be redone, or needs to be modified anyway in light of
Yeah,
the habitat restoration
Yep.
set-asides and so on, right?
Mhm.
Okay. We'll wait on that answer. then.
Okay, well, when we bring it back next time, we'll have that answer for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
The green dots, interestingly, those are our neighboring fire districts or Sac City Fire Department where we have the mutual aid. So when we look at this, we also look at, because you can't look at new development in isolation of existing development. They have to, because the district takes a system-wide approach to this, so we move the resources where they need to be moved. So we also factor in that part of our response times will be covered by our neighbors. And we do the same for our neighbors. So that's taken into account as well in the city gate analysis. So what's all this boil down to? It boils down to $171 million worth of improvements. So we included land costs, construction costs for fire stations, and all the apparatus and equipment and furniture and fixtures and everything else that goes into the fire stations. So land was about $14 million. We valued that at $300,000 an acre. Construction costs for a fire station, we used $450 a square feet per square foot for fire stations. We used our current costs for engines and trucks and medics and all the other equipment that goes into a station. So we come up with $171 million. And remember, this is for the entire build-out. Some of that's going to serve existing development, so we have to back that out of the calculation. Can't remember exactly how much that is. And then some of it is and it's only really reasonable to look at a 20-year planning horizon, because who knows what's going to happen even during that period, but it's
Yeah.
not too realistic to go out 35 or 40 years. So one thing we do is we scope it down to about a 20-year planning horizon. So that brings that number down. So what we ended up including in our analysis was a net of about $98 million. So just under $100 million is what actually we used in our analysis to spread to the development within the next 20-year planning horizon. And that's what we figured the district will need in order to meet the response time standards that the board has established. So the $100 million is the number that we're shooting for. And that's how we have to go through the justification for the building, the development community, to show them how we arrived at this number that we're gonna essentially collect from them over the next 20 years.
Ken, just so I'm clear, you're using the information provided by Citygate?
For the number of stations. Yep. And then we use a firm called, we use NBS
MBS?
to do the actual calculations. I
Okay.
think you're familiar with them with their work they did for the user fees that
And
we'll
the-
talk about.
And the reference I'm making is that you're using the 4-minute response
Yes, sir.
that was listed in Citygate.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I'm going to want to talk to you later about that. There's some
Yeah, I think
errors
it was
listed.
Yeah, these are the standards here.
And then Ken, I had a question, maybe my mind wandered for a few seconds here, but how do we get down from 171 down to 100?
Okay, so we have to take out a portion of those costs that serve existing development.
Oh, so that's the 71 million?
Well, no, most of the 71 million that it goes out is because it's for the, beyond the 20-year planning horizon.
Oh, okay, all right.
So we factor it back, and I think the existing, I have to go back and look at the report, but I'd say maybe 10 million was allocated to existing development, and the other 60 was beyond the
The
20-year
20-year time horizon.
planning horizon.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I mean, this is not set in stone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We should be going back every 5 years and adjusting this as development occurs and we get a better picture of what's going
And
on.
as the costs go up.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So how many stations was that including in the 140?
It
Figure?
was excluding the northwest, so the 171 excludes the northwest planning area. So we're looking at, I think 11 engine companies, 3, it says 11 to 12, but I think we ended up with 11. 11 engine companies, 3 truck companies, 3 battalion chiefs.
In how many stations?
I think those all translate to stations. Is that right, Chief Holbrook?
No, it would
They
count,
all
it would be the
translate to
engines.
stations?
If you backed out 11 or 12 stations for Natomas and that area, what's the total stations you're looking at?
It totally depends, because the way that the study was done initially, Citygate, as he stated, it's overstated the number of stations because there are areas around Natomas that won't receive that density of stations. So you're looking at roughly 20, but it's going to be plus or minus.
Yeah,
11.
But the
so it's
number,
11 to 12 outside of the northwest planning area. Is that 11, that's 11 stations, right?
yes, and it's, yeah, that's the 11 stations is based on the 171 million, right?
Yes, yes. Yep.
Yeah, so those other numbers weren't incorporated in that in the first place because of the variable nature of it.
Yeah. And again, we can't charge development within our existing service area for something outside of our service area. So once we get to this point, then we turn it over to NBS. NBS takes the information and they grind out the numbers. They make sure we're in compliance with state law and current industry standards. Their main goal is to make to spread costs on a fair, equitable, and reasonable basis across all future development. And the developers were very glad to hear this, because this meant they're all paying the same, and they're all contributing toward the cost. Nobody's getting stuck at the end of the line having to construct a fire station or donate land or something that the others got by without. So this way, we try and level the playing field. We're also suggesting that we include an annual inflation index. My recommendation would be that we tie it to the engineering news record, since we're talking about construction and major capital equipment costs. This will result in an updated capital facilities fee ordinance that we would, our plan is to bring it back to the board at your first meeting in January. So it would be first reading, second reading at the next meeting in January, and then implementation 30 days after that. Larry Davis and I met with the North State Building Industry Association and shared this information with them. And you'll see it actually is somewhat favorable to the development community. Our existing capital fire facilities fee, there's only really 2 categories, sprinklered commercial development and single family, and single-family and multifamily. So 75 cents a square foot for new commercial development and 56 cents a square foot for single-family or multifamily units. It's very uncommon to see single-family or residential on a per square foot basis. It's typically on a per unit basis, and that's how NBS approached it. And so their recommendation is single family be at $1,104 per dwelling unit, multifamily at $861 per dwelling unit, commercial retail $582 per 1,000 square feet, so that's 58.2 cents per square foot. Office at 96.5 per square foot, industrial at 52.3 cents per square foot, and institutional, which would be institutional and other, so government buildings, schools, that sort of thing, at 92.4 cents per square foot.
So these prices were arrived at discussions you had with Northern Building Industry?
No, this was NBS's proposed fee structure and dollar amounts. With the estimated units, and we'll give you the full reports and all of those things, but with the potential development over the next 20 years, number of single-family units, commercial and all that, that should generate that net $98 million that we talked about. These represent the maximum fees that the district would be able to levy or charge. You could certainly do less, but the study basically says you shouldn't do more, based on what the costs and the analysis that they just completed. So how does that compare with what we have now? So if you're building a single-family home, 2,100 square foot single-family home, you'd pay $1,176. Under this proposal, you'd pay $1,104. The bulk of our future development is single-family homes. So those folks will be pretty happy with this new fee. Multifamily would go from, for an 1,100 square foot multifamily unit, you currently pay $825. Under the proposed structure, it would go up to $861. So it would go up slightly, not a whole lot. Retail, I just picked a 10,000 square foot retail building. Would go from the current $7,500 for that structure to $5,820. So again, there would be a reduction for commercial retail development. Office would be a little higher. For a 25,000 square foot office, it would go from $15,000 currently up to $20,000 under the proposed structure. 50,000 square foot industrial building would go from the current fee of $37,500 down to $26,150. And the institutional category of 50,000 square foot building would go from $37,500 to $46,200. Again, the Building Industry Association seemed to be fairly pleased with this structure. They're used to seeing per unit fees for residential. This is more in line with what they're typically used to seeing rather than what we have presently. Again, what I try and focus on is the dollar amount that we're trying to collect, which is the $98 million. So this is what it takes to get us to that $98 million. I wanted to touch on one other item. And that is the one other amendment, I should say, to the Fire Capital Facilities Fee Ordinance that we would be recommending to the board, and that is a commercial fee credit program. We were approached by Sacramento County Planning and a developer of the How About Arden project. They're going to basically take down everything that's there now and completely rebuild that commercial area. The county is offering a fee credit program that would provide a credit against the capital, against their development impact fees for the amount of existing building space. So if somebody takes down a 10,000 square foot building and puts up a 12,000 square foot building, they would only pay the fee on the additional 2,000 square feet, not on the the initial 10,000 square feet, under the assumption that you're already providing service for that building. They've already theoretically paid their fees for that initial portion of the building. So why would the district entertain that proposal? It would be to promote the redevelopment of existing commercial properties, such as how about Arden? And that's going to translate to a higher assessed value, higher property tax revenue on an ongoing basis for the district. So I think it's very beneficial in the long run for the district, and I think it's a fair program.
Is there any downside?
Possibly losing the revenue on that at that initial 10,000 square feet if the developer decided to go ahead with the project. But I think, again, it's partnering with our regional partners in terms of trying to promote
Redevelopment?
the redevelopment of older commercial areas. So I think it's
kind
just
of a
one more tool.
revitalization of existing infrastructure in the community already. And I think it's a good trade-off for the community and long-term growth and property values as we go forward versus a one-time fee.
Yeah, especially if the community's putting that forward as something they want to do.
Mhm. And it, I think, provides the opportunity for upgraded fire facilities within these older commercial areas, which I think makes it safer for everybody as well.
Exactly.
So you'll see that program coming back to you as well. One last thing I'd like to touch on, and that is the development plan review fees. If you recall, early in 2014, the board took action to increase the fire inspection fees. We had NBS do a user and regulatory fee study for the district that was completed in about November of 2013. At that time, we were in the midst of the benefit assessment program, and we were talking about a lot of different changes for the development plan review. We were looking at how the district was delivering that service, whether we were meeting our timeframes in terms of the turnaround time in our plan reviews, considering looking at outside agencies to help out and pick up the slack. So the district chose not to change any of the plan review fees at that time. So we moved the fire inspection fees from about a 57% cost recovery to 75% cost recovery. But we left the plan review fees where they were. And according to the NBS study, we were only recovering about 37% of that cost for the plan review fees. So we've taken a number of steps, I think, internally, and I think we're achieving our plan review turnaround times now. We're using some outside firms to help us out whenever we get a backlog. So I think we're delivering the service, and I think it's time to take a look at increasing the level of cost recovery for the plan review fees. The proposal that we're putting forth is a 20% increase over a 3-year period. It's 20% of the existing fees. So by the time you compound that and get through, we would be at about a 70% cost recovery level at the end of the 3 years. Then I would suggest we revisit this again and see where the district is at that time. Because a lot of this depends on how many plans come through, the level of development activity, and all of that sort of thing. But at the end of this 3-year program, we would be generating an additional roughly $250,000 from the plan review program. It's not a whole lot, but I think we need to keep looking at these things and chipping away and recovering as much cost as we can. Because if we don't, we're taking our general property tax money and putting that into these fee-based programs. So I know there's a balance there. That's another thing we've been talking to the North State Building Industry Association about, and so we put them on notice that we're talking about doing this as well. They're taking this information from us, they're sending it out to their members, and said they'd try and get back to us by the end of this month before our next meeting and let us know what the feedback is from the development community.
I got a comment, Ken. We did an NBS study before, and they established what they recommended as the fees that we should be charging. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, we decided not to go with the full fees, but an 80% or maximum?
75% on
of
the
those?
fire inspection, yes.
And just for fire inspections, but the rest of the fees were not brought up to what was recommended?
No, we did not change the plan review fees at that time. So we're still only at about a 35 to 40% recovery level.
The problem that I have is with the new MBS study, they can make all the recommendations they want, but if we're not going to follow through with it, then we're costing us and the taxpayers money by not doing that. Why have a consultant if you're not going to follow what they say is what I'm getting at. So maybe we need to look at that, or
Right.
Well,
Well, the
I think-
NSBA,
Go ahead.
no,
I was just going to say, I think the discussion at the time on that was in the economy, that where we're at, there is very, very little growth. And at a time where we're trying to increase development and get opportunities started to restart the economy, that the discretion into, because it's a minimal, you know, it's obviously a large amount of money, but in the total sector, a small amount of money in our budget, that we didn't want to have that perception that Metro Fire was trying to stymie growth and increased fee at the time, if that's, remember right.
I think you're
and
right.
plus that was advisory from the North States building industry. It wasn't a contract situation, so those are, but the dialogue is good, and I want to commend you for continuing that dialogue, and that'll be very helpful in the future.
And we have reached out and we've gone to county planning meetings and participated in their meetings with large developers along Jackson Highway. So they even contributed toward the cost of the City Gate study and some of the
Right.
other costs, because they know they need to come through the district to get their plans approved. And this is just one way, if we can get all this taken care of ahead of time, it's just going to expedite their planning process.
Right, again, I'd like to commend you and Mr. Davis for engaging everyone to be involved, both financially and idea-wise and input-wise for these studies. That's just great. I've seen a lot of that come through, like just our local CPAC, Cordova CPAC, and it's always, it's good to see that working together. Thank you.
Well, that concludes my presentation for the evening. I know there's a lot of information, but I just wanted to make sure
Ah.
the Finance Committee was up to speed on where we were headed here.
Well, thank you for your work on it, Ken.
Yeah. So I don't have, do you have any further questions, fellow director? I don't either. So with that, we will, well, we have a discussion of some agenda items for next meeting that can be directed to myself or to the clerk. And with that, the next meeting date is scheduled for January 8th, 5 PM in these quarters, and the Finance Committee is now adjourned.